Pensions is one thing. I think financials generally is something that we really need to address for the under 35s. I think when we look at under 35s in Ireland and actually globally, they're starting at a disadvantage when it comes to finances generally.
The pension is something that people don't like to think about. We kind of really get consumed in what our kind of needs are for day to day. There's really this strong disconnect between our kind of present selves and our future selves. It's really about, creating tangible things today that make you care about results tomorrow.
When we talk about pensions, that comes really much further down the pecking order to things like your day-to-day expenses, rent, accommodation. Then you want to get married, you want to have a baby, you want to have a house. And then you might start thinking about your pensions.
The gender pay gap is a huge challenge at the moment because it's not that it's just happened, it's always quite been there, but it's far more transparent now, and it's in the marketplace. So companies are looking at, and really being made to answer as to why it's happening and how can we really resolve the systemic challenge of the gender pay gap.
I think one of the challenges is the ability for employers to offer their staff low cost, high quality advice and get good engagement across their workforce.
Pensions aren't working for people in Ireland. Whether it's regular people trying to get a grip on their financial future, companies worried about provision for their staff, or government with a long-term funding problem, it's clear that we need to change something. We've launched Pensions Awareness Week to change the conversation about pensions in Ireland. We're bringing together experts from outside the industry to offer fresh perspectives from a behavioural science perspective, from the angle of gender equality, and from youth marketing about how this topic can be communicated to young people. We want to gather those insights and offer new ways to engage people with pensions in Ireland and help them think about their financial future.
Pace certainly changes. I mean, for the first time in your life, you're not working to the clock. But the wonderful thing about retirement is it opens up all these new opportunities and you rediscover those parts of yourself because you are the sum of your whole parts.
Welcome to the next session of Conversation for Pensions Awareness Week, and now we're going to talk about the bit after work, that is to say retirement. And a lot of people get nervous thinking about it, what to do, where to go, how to spend their time. And in case you need to know what to do, where to go and how to spend that time, we have brought in the expert of experts to talk about this. Happy to welcome Brian Mooney. Welcome, Brian, good to see you.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
By way of introduction, of course, letting people know that you are working with Standard Life as a life coach, motivator, retirement specialist in your capacity as an end of career guidance counsellor. Yeah. You also work with the Irish Times. You worked as a teacher for many years in Oatlands College in Stillorgan in Dublin. And you know all about second chapters, let's call it that for the purpose of this conversation. Let's get down to business and talk about how important people's work life is, in the sense that when you're in a job, you think, first of all, you're going to be in it forever. And whether you like it or not, you stay there. That's the trajectory for most people. I won't get personal. So tell me, how do you approach that when people say I'm a lifer, for example?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about what work does for us, it gives us our sense of identity.
For sure.
It gives us our sense of purpose. It gives us our sense of empowerment. It gives us our income. It often gives us a lot of our friendships and relationships. Gives us, our sense of fun. And in a sense, even though we look at it as this is where I earn my money, as we go through life in a job, in a role, it's like ivy growing around a building. It becomes integrated, and the job becomes just an aspect of our whole identity, which is tied up with the working role. And then when we step back from that, and we suddenly are no longer doing all those things, even though we may have invested well, had a good pension, all of that sort of stuff, we can often find that we are disconnected, disorientated, and wondering what's wrong.
Yeah.
This is the way it was meant to be. Why haven't I blissfully happy?
Okay, let's talk about that, because in my experience talking to people who have retired, they tend to fall into at least two categories.
Right.
One is, at last, freedom.
Yes.
The high walls are behind me. I want to travel. I want to read. I want to do all the things I couldn't do because I was on a 9-to-5 clock and what have you. That's one. The second one I see is a person who retires and keeps coming back to the workplace to hang out, to have coffee, just because they forgot another thing that they didn't take from their desk. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's in your eyes. Because clearly some people don't want to retire or feel that they're so close and tied up to the work that anything else is worth doing.
Their sense of self and their sense of identity is embedded in the organization.
That's it.
And they have never really reflected upon, or they didn't give themselves time to actually reflect upon those aspects and ask themselves maybe 4 or 5 years out, how much am I getting of everything that I need as a human person within this environment, in the job? And if this isn't here, how do I fulfill those needs? How do I look at those needs that I'm meeting? The first person that you talked about,
who's dying to get out.
Well, you see, if you go back, I mean, you're far too young to remember the 60s and 70s, but ultimately, those eras in Ireland, many people, it was nursing, the guards, the civil service, etc. So people often ended up in roles where they raised a family, they went to work, but when the clock went off in the morning, they weren't ever going, yes. And I set a criteria for myself in my youth. I wanted that yes experience.
Yeah, punch the air,
I wanted that punch the air experience. And I feel that drove me. Now, if you were in the latter category and you were going to work, and yet all of the things I talked about there a few moments ago in terms of identity and relationships, but maybe inside in yourself was a different you, maybe that seed that never got germinated, because when you got the job, that maybe passion or interest just never grew. Retirement can be that opportunity. Retirement can be that opportunity for people to actually discover the essence. How many people retired and then in the following 20 years became international musicians, artists, discovered talents?
They blossomed. Okay.
Because suddenly they had the freedom of time and maybe the money and maybe the opportunity to begin to explore, are there parts of me in my 60s now that I would love to grow and develop, and just even begin to have the courage to even ask that question?
Yes, so I want to go there in a second, but before I do that, I want to talk about retirement anxiety. I presume that's a thing, and that's people of a certain vintage, and it can be anything. Like, because guards retire very young, as far as I know. And you hear in the legal profession they retire when the wig falls off. I mean, so it depends. But that doesn't mean whatever your job is that you don't have anxiety about retiring. Why do people get so worried about retiring?
Well, I suppose the concept of retirement historically is tied up with loss, decay, approaching death. You know what I mean?
That's a bad sell now.
You know, it is, because effectively it was introduced by Bismarck in the 1870s, and it was for the people who managed to survive long enough to get to what was 70, I think, in those days.
If not younger,
And then it came back to 65,
you
know what I mean? But if you go back even to the beginning of the 20th century, you know, people were averaging dying at 49 or 50. So we've now reached an era where the concept of retirement, which was originally intended for those at the very edge of life, is now coming to people who are maybe having 30, 40 years ahead of them.
Yes.
I mean, I spend a lot of time in my home in Lahinch because my mother-in-law's in a local nursing home heading for 102.
Yes.
You know, so if she'd retired, which she didn't, you know, at 65, she would have had 37 years to date. You know what I mean?
It was a different time. There's a program doing the rounds called Live to 100.
Yes.
Secrets of the Blue Zones.
Yes.
And the reason I bring that up is because this guy goes around to what I call blue zones. So see, they've investigated the globe, and there are these blue dots all around the world where people live to be centenarians and above. Yes. And you try to find out what's the common denominator. You'd love it.
Yeah, go on.
So give it a go.
Yeah.
But among them are, like, it's a celebration.
Yes.
And among them, the things they talk about are, like, old people in a community.
Yes.
So if you are 80 or 90,
yes.
you're not dumped the way we dump old people here too often. You know, you sit around, you care about them more. Your health. Yeah. If you live in, like, they went to one village because the hills are steep, they were constantly being healthy because of the circumstances of it. But in other words, there are places where you can, and people are getting older with the right combination of things. And I think you've got, in your experience, you've seen this combination of things that can make retirement not only unscary, but actually something that you should be rushing headlong into.
Well, listen, one of the things, you mentioned health for a start.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, I went to have surgery, get rid of the glasses, had lens replacement. They picked up on an ECG that I had atrial defibrillation.
From an ocular issue?
No, they just did an ECG before surgery. Yeah. Discovered that I had atrial defibrillation.
Holy smoke, okay.
Went and had a few procedures, didn't work. Then I had basically an ablation. Yeah. Perfect. Then they're doing a scan, finding that there's a few nodules here and there around the body. They're keeping an eye on that.
Shapers.
But in other words, we do this for our cars, Ryan.
Well, that's true.
And a lot of people who then discovered that they have a serious health issue, if we actually looked after our health and maybe as a society became more mindful of, you know, literally ensuring that we remain healthy, then that will lead to obviously greater longevity. And the issue, you know, around diet and all of that sort of stuff, I think that we just need to ensure that if we are looking at aging as something which is a natural process, but at the same time, if we are engaging in this renewal of ourselves physically, in terms of, you know, diet and all of that sort of stuff, that ultimately there is no reason why we cannot live to 100.
And to have a happy life.
In a happy life.
Because I think that, I remember going to America once, and to New Orleans, as they have to pronounce, New Orleans as we call it. And anytime I went in to find information from a tourist office, the people looked like they're about 200.
Yes.
I mean, these were like well in there to their 90s, I'd say 80s, that's 80s. And this was about 10 years ago. And I thought, what a lovely inclusive thing to do, that these people hit 70 or 80 and said, I think I'll take up a job as an information. Do you know why? Because they're the repositories of knowledge and information. They're like human moving museums. We should respect people more.
We have a real problem in this society with a lot of young people, because of their upbringing, because maybe they're from single parent families, where they become disconnected, and then we get crime beginning to evolve and maybe all of that sort of stuff. Think of a society in which we began to match those younger people with older people who were mentors, who would actually be there and actually give them a sense of some values to aspire to, etc. And yet for a lot of these older people, they're just sitting around looking for things to do, and yet we have this growing need. We can't afford to fund all this from society and taxation, but if we actually developed, one of the things I do, Ryan, I'm chairman of a number of further education boards, and out in Stillorgan, where I actually chair the board, we have a course which is for tour guides in Dublin.
Lovely.
And the average age is 65.
Well, why wouldn't
and these are people who have lived their full life, and now they're there. And of all of the groups of students in the college, they are the most hilarious. They are all into it, and they're having a ball. And then they go out, and every day they're going out into the city, and they're bringing people around. You know, we need to think of ways of actually re-engaging.
I think you're right, because there are, I think there are, because I know from, you know, see them around, there are some people who hit a certain age and they hand in their badge and gun and say, well, I'm done. And they need to be encouraged to be told, no, you're not. You are valued.
We have a retirement hub on Standard Life website, and on it are interviews that I have done with retirees.
Great.
And different types of people in different scenarios. But one of the great things that you see from that is the kind of activity and hope that a lot of these people have brought into their lives by just getting up and doing new things.
Yeah.
And, you know, challenging them.
Engaging. I think engaging. People always say, like, you know, I'm going to live to 100 because I do crossword every day.
Yeah.
But that is an engagement of sorts. It's an intellectual, so-called engagement. If you like, you're doing the Sudoku or whatever your thing is, or you're watching, you know, Trump or Biden, or you're interested in politics or whatever. Just be interested, whether it's like art or the garden. That was another thing.
I was sitting at home in the back garden a couple of weekends ago. The weather was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there.
I remember that day.
And I'm on my own, and I'm going, okay, well, I stay here. And I said, I could get out the bike.
Yeah.
And I got out the bike.
Good man.
Went down to Sea Point, met about 3 people on the way down.
Yeah.
Had a beautiful swim, came back, bumped into about 2 or 3 people in different scenarios on the way back. And when I got back, I reflected upon it, that if I'd actually just stayed there and not gone out, I would have missed all those interactions.
You were enriched.
So I was enriched.
And engaged.
By taking that one step of actually get up.
Get on your bike.
Get up on your, get on your bike
Get on
and
your
go
bike.
out there and do it.
Yeah, isn't that brilliant?
It's that hesitation. And if you don't do it today, it becomes more difficult tomorrow. Yeah. And if you don't do it tomorrow, and after a period of time, it's like the car that is perfectly tuned but has a flat tire. If you don't deal with that, then a couple of months later, the car will not be in a position.
And
so
that is the thing that I think for a lot of people who are older, and I'm talking into 70s and 80s and beyond, because 70s isn't old anymore. It used to be, but it's just not.
Thank you. I'm 70 next birthday.
Are you really? Congratulations.
Yeah, but there you go.
I mean, look at you. Whatever you're doing, just we should be selling it in jars because you look great. That's the hinge for you.
Yeah.
But it's just not, as you know.
Yeah.
And 80 is getting old.
Yes.
And 90 is quite old.
Yes.
But they're saying America is a gerontocracy now, as you know, from Nancy Pelosi to Donald Trump to Joe Biden, and not all successfully. You know, it depends on each. But they're all going. They're all going for re-election. They're all engaged. That has to matter. But in Ireland. And they're better at this in America than they are here. Mental health and talking about it. Now we're improving on it, and I don't want to get into it in too much great detail because I think some people are turned off by it. But for a moment, you mentioned earlier on, like if you've got a sore tooth, you go to the dentist.
Yeah.
And if your head's messed up,
yes.
In Ireland, there isn't a tradition of saying to your mate in the pub or your friend in the coffee shop, "I'm not really feeling it."
Yeah.
We don't do it.
That's the whole problem. You see, if you've been working all your life and you retire and everything has been done the right way, and then you're sitting at home
and you're doing your head
is done in and you're overwhelmed by it. You don't even know where to go. You don't even know how to address it.
And part of that is because you're embarrassed. Because in Ireland we don't talk about that. It's a bit awkward. Or where do I begin? Or if it's GP, sure, I'll meet them in Super Value. You know what I mean? Your nerves are big.
Admitting to the fact that actually, if you go back to what I said about Glasser, that effectively you're in a scenario where effectively your relationships have been sundered in many cases.
Yes.
Your sense of empowerment. Who was I?
Yeah.
Who was this person before I retired? And now who the hell am I?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In terms of everything that I had done and that sense of sitting in your chair and being comfortable in it. And just the whole thing about the freedoms that came with having that role in life and the sense of fun you had it. And if that's all gone, sometimes you can be sitting there and going, what's going on here?
So it's worth talking to somebody professionally about that.
Absolutely.
It's worth it, whether it's a therapist or a counsellor or something.
Well, we have a thing
Yeah.
called a Second Life questionnaire on Standard Life.
Yeah.
And basically there are 8 questions which trigger all of those.
Okay, to see where you are in your head.
To see where you are. And before retirement, it's the sort of thing that somebody should do is maybe 4 or 5 years before it, go and find a local financial advisor and go in and talk the money, but also talk about all these other issues. Talk about, if I retire, 1, how can I ensure that I'm financially secure? And 2, how can I ensure that when I am financially secure, I will also have a quality of life? Which is why I say, let's look at our education system. Now, I've talked to government about this, and I'm making the point very strongly because I'm very still involved in the management and education side at this stage, that we have such resources out there that in many cases, with a very strong economy at the moment, we have a lot of unused capacity in the system, particularly at further education, adult education. Why don't we focus on helping people who are on that brink of retirement in their 50s and 60s cope with the skills they will need to be fully, stilly active in society. Think of all the scams that are now happening, you know, in terms of people being phoned and understanding how to use the technology and the media and all that sort of thing. If we continue to upskill people as they age, they will then be able to take the richness that they have had through life experience, marry it with that, and then they are still giving to society. So we will have a richer society, and I don't mean financially. We will have a better quality society. They will and obviously if you're feeling still energized and you're still feeling more fulfilled, you're going to have a less of a burden on the health system. You're going to suffer less sense of loss and all of that sort of thing.
Yes.
So we keep people physically healthier, mentally healthier, and society will be better. And as I said, if we can marry older people's intellect and skills and experience with young people who may need that level of support, think what quality of society we could have.
Of course, and friendship is important, isn't it? And friend groups. You described beautifully the going down to the sea and on your rudder and just meeting some people that you otherwise wouldn't have met if you hadn't.
Exactly.
And you know, I remember when sea swimming started to become a thing before people, I'm not talking about people who used to swim in the sea, I'm talking about sea swimming, and particularly during the pandemic. I used to be a bit sniffy about it and the dry robes and whatever, and then about 6 months later I realised it was really helping people, and I stopped taking the mickey and I stopped mocking, because actually, do you know what, this is really important in some people's lives.
I've had a home in the Hinch for 25 years. I'm only starting sea swimming.
You're only new to it now.
I'm only starting.
What took you?
And I don't know.
Sitting there in front of you.
Yeah, but maybe the water was a bit colder. It's quite
global warming now. Now we're into a whole other world.
Yeah, it's quite.
And that's a different anxiety.
Do you know something that I've discovered?
Yeah.
As I walk quite an amount, and I discover in walking that people with dogs talk to other people with dogs.
That's right.
I have now discovered this.
Swimming is the same.
People who swim talk to each other in the sea.
Of all ages.
Of all ages.
And that's so important, because now, because I have a cousin of mine, and she was an in-law, but it's either at 7:30 or 9:30, and it could be on the Coral Strand, or it could be in Airport Beach, wherever it might be, and there's guaranteed, it's the tribe, let's face it, and it's that group of people who are your granny's age, and your cousin's age, and your son's age, and you should never have been friends, and here you are. It's like the Thursday Murder Club, you know, read those books, and that's got to be important into retirement, because loneliness has to feature. Loneliness, as you know, is a disease.
It is, of course it is.
It will kill you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we make sure that people aren't depending so much on work, and then suddenly they're going, boof, you're on your own, you're table for one.
It's the first step, Ryan. It's just take one step.
Well, that's important.
And this is the issue.
Yeah.
Because if you are lonely, you don't have to imagine yourself doing something amazing, transformative. Just go out, because you're going to bump into somebody. And that might trigger something else, and that might lead to something else. Just each day have the courage to live life in colour rather than black and white.
Is it? And what is? I just recall working in a Spire once, and there was a delicatessen counter, and I was working with an older lady, and this woman who was very old would come in every day, and they used to serve the rashers and sausages individually. You probably. And she'd come in on Monday and say, can I have one rasher and 2 sausages? Tuesday, she'd have 1 sausage and 2 rashers. Wednesday, and so on. And I said to this lady, why doesn't she just buy 7 rashers and 7 sausages? And the lady responded and said, because we are her day.
Correct.
Imagine. We were the only people she met in a given day.
People who send letters to themselves so that the postman will come to
Tell me that doesn't happen. That's too sad.
And, they go to the door to have somebody to talk to.
Oh, that's awful.
You know what I mean?
Okay, so let's talk about those people for a moment. How do we get to them? How do we help them? How do we encourage them out? How do we stop that rot? Cure the disease of loneliness? Where do you begin with that?
It's about building community, I suppose. It's about
mehel, as we call it.
Pardon?
Mehel.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is a universal thing, which is an Irish word. But
absolutely, and men's clubs and all the men's sheds and all that sort of stuff. It's a question of being aware and conscious that if you have somebody in your neighbourhood who is vulnerable, find a way of actually
making an excuse.
Of actually, going to their door or finding some reason. During COVID, when they established all of these neighbourhood WhatsApp groups.
Yeah, it was a really nice thing to do. And
that is actually,
whatever,
and now that they've sustained and people are putting in, I've got something that I want to give away, does anyone want it? And you know, or if there's some security issue. So now there's a conversation happening where people who are in their houses can actually say something to their next door neighbours.
It took a pandemic.
Yeah, it took a pandemic.
Says something about us as a society.
Yeah.
But at least if we can keep it going,
Yes.
rather than shut it down,
Yeah.
that's what's
Well,
good.
the key issue for me, Ryan, is it's having conversations. It's about, yes, we all age and it's a natural process, but ultimately retirement planning should be central to all our lives without it being the fear factor, without it being something that we're thinking about, that, like going to the dentist, that it's something about freedom, it's about liberation, it's about second opportunities. It's about ensuring that we live fully. And if, as you said earlier, you know, the day job was not something that was inspirational, look at ways of reinventing yourself, because we only get one life.
Yes.
We only get one chance on this planet. And every experience that we have is a chance to become more fully the you or the me that we can be as human beings, because ultimately that's the challenge.
Yes.
That's the challenge of life.
What about people who, I mean, it's Pensions Awareness Week, so let's talk about that for a moment, pensions. What if somebody's on a really awful pension? Like really rubbish, they're on very little money. They're excited, they'd love to travel, because people always say, I get to travel, I can go to Marbella and I can go to France. And there's somebody sitting there on a lot less than that saying, well, I'd love to do that, but it's just not my wheelhouse.
Maybe if they go and talk to a financial advisor, they might be sitting on an asset.
Like MABS or someone.
Yeah, well, they can go to a financial advisor who will look at maybe their financial circumstances.
Okay.
And you know, I mean,
you just said, I missed that. You said they could be sitting on an asset. You know,
they could be sitting on an asset, for instance.
They miss themselves.
You know, I mean, I've seen scenarios where, you know, I had a family member who died last year, and she had far more resources than she was ever going to need. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And yet people may be in a situation where they are sitting there not realizing that ultimately, you know, the house they are in, you know, could be, you know, refinanced in a way that would give them a quality of life and still leave a substantial inheritance.
Some breathing space.
You know, so go and talk to somebody who knows finance, who understands money and can advise you, because quite often you don't see the full picture, whereas somebody who's an expert in the area might.
Tell me a little bit about the surveys that you did. You conducted the interviews.
Yes.
Was there a lot of commonality? Was there a thread among the stories you heard about people retiring?
Basically, the funny thing is, Ryan, people who have retired express a level of satisfaction and happiness which is quite high. But prior to retirement, people are more anxious. And a lot of people are not actually focused on, or they say they don't want to think about it. But I think that's the dentist phenomenon. Who wants to think about your next dental visit?
Nobody.
You know, because the concept of retirement and going to the dentist can be synonymous in some people's minds, because that anxiety thing, what retirement signifies, that I'm getting older or maybe getting more vulnerable, etc. And who wants to focus on that? So ultimately, what we need to do is to help people talk about these things so that effectively the fear factor disappears, that it isn't a thing to be anxious or concerned about. It's a thing to feel, let's reflect upon what the freedoms, the extra 2,000 hours of work in time that most people spend on the day job, what am I going to do with that? And how can I use that creatively and positively in my own life to actually make myself a better version of myself with the freedoms that will come with a retirement and with a pension and whatever.
You sing a very positive song about the world of retirement, and I think a lot of it comes from personal experience, but also from talking to people and advising people. I think it's good to have
the freedom to not have to get up at the same time every single morning, Monday to Friday.
Clockwork Orange.
And you know what I mean? And to be able to live in Lahinch half the time, live in Dublin the other half of the time, work intensely as I love working, not because I need the money, I don't. I work because it gives me a sense of personal fulfillment and satisfaction. And if at the end of the day, what I do, and I still work with young people, I get contacted by parents and I will meet with young people. I'm meeting with 2 of them this evening.
Great.
You know, because I'm up in town. Yeah. And you get those emails and texts from them.
So keep going, stay engaged. And last question, how much did you pay for your train ticket from Ennis today?
Nothing, because I have the joy of being able to travel for free in this country. Thank you, government.
I can't wait. I can't. Brian Mooney, what a pleasure.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, really enjoyed chatting with you today. Okay, that's Brian Mooney joining us for this session. That's where we're going to leave it for now, but we have more coming up, so stay with us and we'll see you shortly.